Thanks, Liz. This one's for all the GPs and family offices out there. There's a lot of misunderstanding, and we want to bring you guys together. And just a quick note that sadly, Veronica couldn't be with us. So you have me, Colette, Natalie, Beto, and Charlotte, and I'm going to ask my fellow panelists to introduce themselves, starting with you, Nat.
Yeah, hi everybody. Pleasure to be here today. My name is Natalie Otuoma, investor at a single family office based out in Berlin. Source of the Wealth is the principal, sold his business to HR tech business over multiple private equity exits, and in a very lean team of 3, we manage his wealth. We've adopted a multi-asset strategy, and so we look across all asset classes, across privates and publics. I will caveat on the private side, we do have an allocation for venture capital, but haven't yet allocated or deployed there. Reason being, we are 2 years young, and so we're very much in the build-up phase of building up our books. And so we are over-indexing on investing into specifically funds, and where opportunistically direct co-investments. So yeah, looking forward to this conversation.
Great to be here. I am Beto Payares, born in Mexico, raised in the US. And to answer Liz's question, when you call this particular family office one of 3 that I represent, I'm not part of that family. I'm sort of the in-house expert when it comes to venture capital specifically. I don't do late stage, I don't do private equity, I don't do real estate. I represent a couple of families in the transportation cross-border space. And one in particular that is the largest builder, developer, manager of military housing in the world. We have 106 venture fund positions that we manage for them collectively, and about 75 direct investments. I've been doing that for about 20 years.
And Charlotte. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. So Charlotte Palmer, I work at Integra Global Advisors, multifamily office. The team and office is based out of Stamford, Connecticut, so US-based. I'm based out of London. We do the whole investable universe at Integra. I focus only on the VC side, which we define as emerging managers, funds 1 to 4, sub 100 million vehicles, above 10. But we do solos, teams, generalists, specialists, sector agnostic, across the US, Israel, Latin America, and Europe. So big top of funnel there.
And I'm Colette. I have a family office, and the source of my wealth, which is a very good question to ask a family office, by the way, is my eponymous public relations firm, which has offices in Europe and US, and we do work with technology and venture capital funds, helping them with strategy all the way down to media relations. And that's how I got into venture capital, quite frankly. I started to understand the asset class and felt comfortable investing. So the first very pesky question goes to Natalie. And Natalie, I have heard a rumor that your due diligence process is somewhat rigorous, and maybe more rigorous than some of our GP friends would expect. Do you mind telling us a little bit about what it looks like?
Yeah, sure. Funnily enough, I didn't actually realize how rigorous my due diligence process actually is. And that's purely because I've sat across multiple sides of the table. So been a previous chief of staff working at a startup, so have operator experience. In my previous life, also worked at a venture capital fund as an investor, and now on the LP side at a family office. And so I think I kind of really understand what good diligence looks like. Now in my seat as an LP, I think one big misconception a lot of GPs have is that it's going to be really light touch diligence, and it's all going to be purely based on relationships and intuition.
And a couple lunches.
And whilst that is, important in your overall underwriting, I think GPs should expect family offices to have just as rigorous of a diligence process as an institutional allocator. So for me, I look beyond just the track record and the pitch deck. I'm trying to understand, what are your prior returns as a GP? How did you contribute to those returns? I'm trying to understand what is your portfolio construction discipline, not just in this fund, but across your entire career. What is that golden thread? And most importantly for me, I'm trying to understand as a GP, when things don't go according to plan, how do you react? And so a practical example of this is, looking just beyond the data room, I'm trying to speak to a lot of people who might not necessarily be on your GP reference list. And so this includes former employees who maybe have recently left your fund in the last 12 to 18 months, former colleagues from previous funds, and maybe some underlying portfolio companies that maybe aren't performing as planned. I want to emphasize this exercise isn't to catch anybody out. I'm simply trying to understand, is the narrative that you're sharing with me matching the reality? And so, do I get a lot of pushback? Absolutely. I've had a few GPs say, "Oh, as a family office, we've never been asked to share, this kind of information." And respectfully to that, I say, I'm working on behalf of a family's wealth and capital, and so I feel like it's my responsibility to be, a good steward of that capital. And I'll finish by saying the best managers that I've invested in are actually the ones that do the complete opposite and are fully transparent and overshare. The feedback I've received from them is that, wow, Natalie, you really have gone super granular and you really understand not only our asset class, but our fund and as GPs, our strategy. And so I think actually by being quite rigorous, it does almost signal that we are looking to be long-term partners as opposed to just a one-off check and moving on. So I'm quite rigorous in my diligence.
And remember, we talk to each other. We're constantly speaking to other family offices and even institutional LPs to get a read and compare notes. I'm kind of curious, Charlotte, have you ever been told that your due diligence questions are disproportional to your check size? And Beto, same questions coming for you.
I guess, yeah, a little bit of context on this. I used to work at the British Business Bank, so deploying cornerstone checks of £50 million. And then at Integra, pivoted seats to doing 500K and some smaller vehicles. Some people during diligence are unwilling to share all their information for a smaller check, to which I just go, hey, you don't need my money then. I just think, to Natalie's point, if you're not going to be transparent, we're not going to have a good relationship for the next 10, 15, if not longer years if I back you fund over fund. So it's really disappointing when people, I think, are limiting on what they give you and judging your value based on your check instead of actually the experience, the caliber, and the governance and expertise you can bring them as a fund.
And you're upfront about the size checks that you cut, right? You're not...
First call, first thing, in the intro, so the first 3 minutes is when I say it.
And Beto, have you had a similar experience?
Yeah, I've had the similar experience. One particular experience was a very, very large, call it ESG fund, and one of the family offices does a lot of construction. ESG is a very important component for them. I have to talk to 10 to 12 funds that do the same thing for me to get a sense of who's in market, what's real, what's not. So we focused on one fund that was pretty interesting, very large LPs, utilities and whatnot. Part of our diligence was, I need to talk to two or three entrepreneurs, 2 or 3 co-investors, 2 or 3 current LPs, and our check size is $2 million. And that's kind of on the mid to higher end of our check. And this went through their placement agent. We typically don't really work with placement agents, but there was a prior relationship. And the head of that, the GP of that fund said, absolutely not. You have to write a much bigger check. So when you are a fiduciary for a family office, your number one job as their representative is to make sure they trust you, and that you're doing things in their best interest. And so, but I'm also responsible for coming back to them and saying, we hit this snag, here's what the snag is. The GP went around me, called the family office, and they said, no, you do what he says or we don't invest. And that's our process. 20 years doing this, we've had a few cycles like that. So it's super important to respect that process. Family offices are trying to professionalize as they grow up in the industry as well.
One thing to also add is some GPs might not realize, but actually by the time we're getting to that late stage diligence, we want to give you the money. We're ready to give you the money, and often in some cases where a GP has been overly transparent, we could have been thinking of doing a 1 million check and actually maybe double that and actually increase our allocation.
That's happened, hasn't it?
It's happened, yeah. So you could be leaving money on the table just by not, being nice.
Or engaging. We have responsibilities. We have responsibilities, and maybe in the past handshake deals were done, but it's changing a great deal. Charlotte, you raised a question, well, actually more of just a thought, that the LPAC is a critical but often overlooked protection for LPs. And if you were going to advise FOs, or how should family offices be thinking about LPAC participation?
Yeah, great question. I'm a bit biased that I love an LPAC. Obviously, I've come from being a cornerstone anchor investor, automatically given the LPAC. Integra has 31 fund positions. 8 of those we have LPAC seats, which is, I think, impressive for our kind of 500K to 1 million check size across some of those vehicles. I just think an LPAC is so important, and family offices aren't utilizing it enough. I think people see it as, or especially GPs, oh, it's just someone I have to go and do a few slides to twice a year and answer a few questions. Like, as a family office, you want that seat. You get voting rights in terms of all the important decisions. We have it at the moment where we have a solo GP who's incredible, and they want to go do something a little bit different. I have voting rights on that decision now because I hold one of those seats. It's good governance. You can watch them, how they're communicating and they're not doing things right. You can build closer relationships between those GPs and LPs. I've had GPs phone me saying, I'm thinking about selling a third of this company. It's 1x DPI my fund. What do I do? Or I'm really thinking about hiring an associate. Can you help me with some interviews? I would never have those opportunities to have that real-world insight into those funds unless I held the LPAC seat. And co-investment opportunities. I can track those companies so much more and have real-life conversations and get access to those founders easier if I'm on the LPAC. And GPs should see it not as a tick box exercise, but put people on the LPAC who are actually valuable to you and have expertise sitting on LPACs. Don't just put your 3 biggest checks because
they're the biggest.
they're the biggest, yeah, and actually they've never sat in an LPAC and they don't know what they're doing and it's their first venture check. Like, that's not going to be useful to you whatsoever. Happy to talk about LPACs afterwards.
And similarly, Beto, we were talking and you mentioned that there's no standard reporting framework for how GPs communicate with their family office LPs. And what would a minimum acceptable standard look like in your eyes?
Right. It is improving, but not fully across the board. So part of our diligence is we ask, let me see how you report back every quarter. I want to see what your report looks like to LPs and so on and so forth. Is it consistent? Are you only highlighting good news, or are you, highlighting things that are, potentially challenging and whatnot? There's a fallacy where some GPs think that the family office is just long-term, quote-unquote, patient capital, which is sometimes a euphemism for they're not going to pay attention, right? That's truth, right? And so, I often remind them, like, these people did not build their wealth over, 3 generations by not paying attention, right? And they pay attention to everything. And the capital we allocate to venture competes with the capital that's allocated across other, businesses the family might have. So therefore, the reporting standard has to be equivalent. And so we want to see public market equivalence when you're measuring yourself and things like that. ILPA, the International Limited Partner Association, puts out a lot of templates. They're very cumbersome, some of them, but they're starting to become more widely adopted because once you set up the infrastructure, the technology to report a certain way, it becomes a little easier. And if for nothing else, you should upgrade your reporting standards to make the family offices feel like they're in the same room with institutional investors. That's very important. You want that kind of commonality, and the LPAC is certainly super important as a mechanism of that.
Natalie, I see you nodding. Is there anything you'd like to add or thoughts?
Oh, no, I think Beto's done a pretty good job. Yeah, he's kind of nailed it.
Then, when you're advising families, and what do you wish they knew about are there any misconceptions, or put another way, what do you wish that they understood about entering this asset class? And I'll go back to you, Beto.
So I was very fortunate, particularly with the first family, which is the largest one that I started representing. The chairman of this particular large conglomerate was on the board of UTEMCO, of the investment committee, which is the second largest endowment, university endowment. So he knew a lot about venture. So I was actually learning from him. And in fact, when he brought me on board, I said, if you give me 5 years, I'm going to fuck up. If you give me 10, I'm going to learn. If you give me more time, I'm going to make money, right? But that he understood what he was getting into. The newer families that come in, they need a lot more hand-holding of how to think about timing, how to think about deployment, how to not think that, just because you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, how to deploy in a pace that makes sense, how to treat deals that come from very close familial ties or friends at the same standard as things that you might find at a conference or, et cetera, right? And that's important, to understand the asset class in terms of timing, the patience that you need, and how to measure it, and also allocation within your asset base and investable assets. That's a very important component.
Charlotte, anything?
I was like, can I jump in on this one?
Please, if you
You
wanted
summed it
to.
up really nicely. One thing we have to do a lot of education around, and our families have some really intellectual individuals, but us maybe not so expertise in the venture side, but they want us to chase the logos. So they're like, how many Sequoia funds have you done? And I'm like, none. It's like, oh, how many are you going to do this year? And I'm like, none. And it's just like a different way of looking at venture to do that, kind of maximizing my commercial returns, which our opinion is early stage, emerging managers, small vehicles. So we will never play in kind of the big logo games. Or they're like, have you done SpaceX? Or are you looking at a SpaceX secondaries? And I'm like, no, I will never play there because I want SpaceX, back when it was started. I don't want SpaceX now. So there's that education role. And I think the other thing, and you raised a really good point about the kind of the friends and family, we get a lot of our families who get deals and from their network, and that's amazing. Venture is, I think, when you're learning, and you'll all know this from your experience, you have to see a quantum of deals to understand a quality deal. And so a lot of them are like, oh, but my cousin's raising this thing and it's really great. And I'm like, but is it? Or are you just looking at it in isolation of you only seeing 5 deals in your entire lifetime compared to 5,000 of a emerging GP?
One thing I'd like to add is the famous saying, to meet one family office is just to meet one family office. So for example, in my case, I love it when a GP tries to understand the source of wealth, because that will almost dictate how we're thinking about the asset class. So in my example, the principal bootstrapped his business and sold to private equity, and so that sort of relationship to venture capital isn't quite there, which hopefully is where I come in and sort of support that. But to Charlotte's point, it really is an educational piece of just firstly understanding where we are at in terms of our journey in the asset class before sort of diving in and wanting to get married right away.
And that's actually a great question. What do you wish that GPs understood about what it takes to get family offices into this asset class?
I can jump in on this
Please.
one. I think one thing that was a big learning curve for me, because I came from a public background, I don't have to put the money here. As a family office, you're dealing with people's personal wealth. They can invest that anywhere. You're not a program or an initiative that's dedicated to venture. This is someone's personal money, which they can invest anywhere. So I think it's an appreciation of, I had a fund where they kind of released a quarterly report and they'd done a drawdown notice and they were drawing down 35% of funds in one drawdown for one company. And I said, look, what are you investing in? It sounds exciting and it's a lot of money. And they were saying, oh, it's confidential. And I was like, but what you don't understand is this is someone's personal wealth. So I'm having to back channel and tell them what their personal wealth is going into. So I think it's a little bit of an understanding of you're dealing with people's real money here. It's not kind of an initiative or a government program or anything like that.
Yep.
What I would add, and that's a great point, what I would add is that there are some family offices that do have on one level you can call it a pet project. On others you could call it a thesis of what is wealth to them. And so 2 examples. One family office only invests in things that they know deeply. That is it. And so if you bring anything else, real estate or transportation or things like that. Exactly. The other one might do things very differently, and they want diversification and learning, and they don't really care about the cocktail talk, oh, I'm in this deal or that deal. They care about building people and ecosystems. They literally want to seed something that they can be proud of, even in silence, over generations to come. And so they do that by finding GPs that can deploy that capital across certain ecosystems that they know would be meaningful. Hence, for us, we do some ESG type of investing that kind of, straddles that.
I would also add to Bito's and Charlotte's point earlier of the family's capital is constantly competing with with other asset classes. And so having some awareness of the configuration of the family office team and how much they can actually feasibly do in 24 hours can be a constraint into how easy it is to enter specific asset classes. So also just being aware of who the team is and how many people can actually facilitate the quantum of deals that we can look at.
And looking around, I saw a couple heads nodding of our family office friends also out in the audience. One quick thing, Charlotte, you mentioned it. What are you keen to talk about after the panel? Anything that's on your mind that you want to just chat to people about?
Oh, I mean,
Topic of interest?
talk to me about anything, but LPACs.
LPACs is your...
Always happy to help there.
Talked about LPACs. Beto, anything on your mind you'd love to chat to folks about?
Well, just generally speaking, I don't spend a lot of time in Europe. We really haven't done a lot of deployment in Europe, but that may change in the next cycle. We look at things every 2 years where we adjust. So if you have something interesting that's going on that I could take away and ruminate for the next 12 months or so.
And he will ruminate. And Natalie, anything you're keen to talk about?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about AI. So as part of, a big part of what I do is thinking about our AI strategy. Currently, we have not done much, and so I'd love to gain more insight as to sort of what we should be doing.
And we're going to turn this microphone over to... we have questions. We have a live microphone actually out in the audience for folks who want to ask this panel questions. They have agreed to take your questions most graciously.
Hi there, my name is Riley Kamener. I'm a marketing agency for VCs and private equity firms. I'm curious your take on family offices going direct and increasingly kind of leapfrogging the GP relationship and going directly, including into maybe some of the startups that we saw over the last couple of days here. And what's your thought on that, both for the family offices, but then also what does that mean for GPs that are trying to build relationships with these family offices?
I can take that one. I think when we're thinking about fund commitments versus direct investing, I don't see them as sort of competing choices. I see them to be quite complementary, things that can offer different objectives for the overall portfolio. So essentially, by investing into a fund, we're getting a level of optionality that I myself might not fully get because I'm not spending, every day building my network, speaking to individual companies, winning allocations. So I think there is a good, lever by sort of getting, almost sort of paying an admission price to investing into a fund to cherry pick the best direct deals. In terms of the risk return trade-offs, I think the attraction is obviously obvious. You get to have greater control of your capital deployment. You can bypass the management fees and the carry on that capital. And if you've got increased conviction behind an opportunity, you can really pump up the capital behind that opportunity. But for me personally, I don't think it's a question of whether direct investment opportunities yield higher returns. I think if you're a good picker, oftentimes they can. For me, the question is, am I being adequately compensated for the significant concentration risk that I'm taking in constructing the overall portfolio?
If I may add just a little, for someone like me or the clients I represent, we tap out. We did a lot of fund and direct investing, a little bit to groom the fees and a little bit to learn more and get deeper on. But there's a few GPs here in the room where I've done some direct deals and I get very involved in those direct deals. I'm on the board or board observer, and it's a different time commitment that we as a family office have to make, and so there's a limit to that. And so we've hence stepped back a little bit until we work through the backlog of deals that we have.
I think you're going to see more of that also. Charlotte, anything you want to add?
I guess just to summarize, because both points were very good. Every family office is different. Some may do directs via co-investments only. Some may have a dedicated resource and expertise in the direct side, so they have an ability to do it. I would just say figure out a good strategy and stick to that, and not try and do everything all at once, because we get a lot of amazing opportunities, and it's very easy to just drop discipline and go ham. So yeah, figure out a strategy and run with that, whatever works best for you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the question. Next question.
Hi, Nityan Lal from ICOS Capital. I have a question. This is largely a European GP community, some of us impact focused. What are your investment budgets, or let's say allocation ambitions for the current year in European, perhaps impact type of funds? And what type of return profile are you looking for, knowing fully well that the market's in a bit of a dip, so the DPIs are less attractive than they usually would be?
Beto, I think you said none.
Well, we do have one fund
That's
manager
right.
in London where we're in 3 of his funds. We're not in Fund 4 because we haven't seen DPI, right? But that's endemic in the entire industry, right? So, but that also came from a long-term relationship we had with him and with his other LPs. We believe he will get to where he needs to be given his strategy. We are likely to look for more exposure because, you know, the US market is delightfully fucked up, right? In terms of the barbell and allocation and whatnot. So, you know, we are quietly starting to look for, say, 12 months out.
I guess I can jump in on this one. We have a cadence of, which is kind of crazy, 10 managers a year. We've just done our 4th deal so far, so pretty good on the pacing there. And active. To your point around impact, I think, especially in Europe, the whole impact versus commercial returns debate has been dropped, and I think those two things can be mutually beneficial to each other. I think that is much more a strong view than in the US, where we're looking to invest and people seem either really high into it or allergic to it. I love the European ecosystem at the moment. I think it's really fleshed out itself. I think there's so much opportunity here. I think you all are probably too modest compared to some of the US pitches I see, and you could do more to sell yourselves because you're probably too nice about yourselves and you're doing amazing things and have amazing opportunities out there. I think also the ecosystem's growing. There was that great stat last year of only 6 to 8% of European VCs are actually operators. And the amount of pitches I'm seeing nowadays with operators in, I think that's going to increase dramatically over the next 2 years. So I personally think it's an exciting time for Europe and happy to be investing here.
I'll add, again, as I mentioned, we are still in the ramp-up phase. We're 2 years young. Overwhelmingly, our portfolio is US and Asia-based. We have started dabbling into the European market primarily through venture debt. So that's sort of our gateway drug into venture capital asset class. But yeah, that's sort of how we think about it. In terms of, you know, quantum of how much we're deploying over the year, we don't really have a set number. We have a, you know, across all of our assets, a percentage allocation that we hope to reach in the next 5 years. And so it's just about vintage, timing, pacing to try and get to that percentage.
One last question. We have time for one last question. But if not, we can go immediately to the floor and make ourselves available to you, so that's not a problem. Liz, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you guys. Amazing. Big round of applause, please.